if you're not getting enough protein in the windows that you eat, you're going to lose muscle, okay, as well as body fat. Hello and welcome to the Weaponized Body Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Ryan Hewitt. And as always, we are coming to you with an episode today, a metabolic episode, and I'm going to talk about a controversial topic. You could say that some people are big time fans of this. You could say some people are not such fans of this. And there seems to be a lot of, controversial research about it, or not controversial, but contradicting research. And that is fasting. So there's been a lot of buzz around fasting, especially in the last 10 years. Whether this is something you should be doing, is this something that you shouldn't be doing? Who is the best candidate for this? Is it something that, is natural that our ancestors did, and this is why it's good for us? So what I'm going to do is, in this episode, break down, what's scientifically proven and what's hype. Common mistakes people make when fasting. This is coming from personal experience as well. How it can enhance or harm your health depending how it's done, and why it's, my favorite is why it's not magic for weight loss. This seems to be the number one reason people are wanting to fast, or that it's attractive. It's like, hey, this is an excuse to skip breakfast or starve myself. So, why this is not generally the best way to think about it. And again, I'm not giving you medical advice here. I'm coming from a place of personal experience, research that I have come across and read, and also patients I've taken care of. So, clinical experience. So let's jump into it. Let's talk about the scientific foundations of fasting. So I believe that fasting took off after 2016, rightfully so. There was a doc named Yoshinori Ohsumi. So he won the Nobel Prize of Science for this thing called autophagy. So a lot of people know what that means now, or they've heard of it. Autophage or autophagy, however you want to pronounce the bloody word. It's a mechanism that is turned on in your body to help you clean up cellular debris. You could think about it like your garbage and recycling. You're also just like your antioxidation, all that kind of stuff. It's your body's mechanisms that are turning on to really clean up and recover. And what this research found is that it turns off a mechanism in your body called mTOR. So that's a regulator of cell growth, like protein synthesis, metabolism, and the drug rapamycin, if you've heard of it, targets that mechanism. So what they found is like excessive activation of this mTOR is linked to aging and cancer and metabolic disease, etc. So they found that fasting inhibits this mTOR mechanism due to the absence of things like amino acids, glucose, insulin, all that kind of stuff. So that's why you hear people really tout the autophagy benefits, which, by the way, autophagy happens in your body regardless if you purposely fast or not. Your body's still always programmed to heal itself and to clean up all the cellular debris and whatnot. Fasting just happens to, deepen that mechanism, which is supposedly connected to increased longevity. I know that they've seen this in animal studies, maybe not necessarily human studies other than observational. It's supposedly connected to improving your metabolic health, improving your insulin sensitivity, et cetera. So autophagy is something that has been proven. The insulin sensitivity question, there are studies that shows that intermittent fasting has reduced insulin resistance and actually lower type 2 diabetes risk. So for anybody who has like blood sugar dysregulation, you have insulin resistance, pre-diabetes, fasting is actually something that probably would be intelligent to start programming into your daily life. It just changes the window of eating. And during those downtimes where your body gets to recover and turn on this autophagy, it also will help reset some of that insulin sensitivity. There's also been shown some cognitive benefits. So we talked in our last podcast any podcast that I've done on movement so far, I like to talk about the neurochemical called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. It's something that's turned on when you exercise. And again, it's like fertilizer for your brain. It's something that increases your ability to learn, retain information, etc. Cool enough, fasting has been connected to increasing BDNF, potentially improving your overall brain health. And again, in the show notes, I can post some of these cited research studies. This one's from Madison in 2017. Longevity benefits. So caloric restriction and fasting mechanisms have been linked to lifespan extension. So again, those are animal models. And lastly, I've really discovered the benefits, and bodybuilders have known this forever, the benefits of fasted cardio, which has been shown to enhance what's called fat oxidation due to like your lower insulin levels, and it increases the reliance on your fat storages. Schoenfeld in 2011 has shown this in one of his research studies. So that's one of the really cool things that bodybuilders take advantage of, that morning fasted cardio, that zone 2 cardio, helps you dip into your fat storage before you start eating. Common myths and misconceptions. Fasting will slow your metabolism. So this is untrue. Some studies suggest that it actually can increase your short-term fasts, like 48 hours or less. So we're not talking like long-term starvation. It's due to the like increased norepinephrine. So it won't slow your metabolism down. That whole word metabolism is very confusing to a lot of people. Doing periodic fasts will not decrease or slow your metabolism. Similarly, it won't make you lose muscle. So muscle loss is actually been shown to be minimal as long as your protein intake is adequate on your feeding days. So I'll say that again. As long as you're eating enough protein when you eat, you won't lose muscle. So this is something that I see as a huge problem, and we're going to get into that when I talk about fasting mistakes in a minute. But people that are not, they're shortening the window that they eat. And by shortening the window that they eat, by default, they don't eat enough protein. And this is a problem because you will lose muscle if you do not eat enough protein during the times that you eat, if you are intermittent fasting. So fasting doesn't mean starvation, by the way. Starvation is like chronic caloric deprivation. Fasting is like a controlled deprivation. So whether it's like, by the way, most people they fast, right? Break fast is breakfast. You are fasting between the time your last meal was to your next meal. So a lot of times it's like dinner to breakfast for most people. For me, I try to practice a 14-hour window between the last time I eat and when I eat first thing in the morning. So like whatever your window is, some people practice 12, 14, 16, 18, even longer fasts. It's one of those things that, it can help. It can help with all of those things that I mentioned. But again, it's not starvation, right? And it's not magic for weight loss. I can't emphasize this enough. It doesn't mean it doesn't burn more fat necessarily. It simply shortens your eating window, which may lead to a reduced caloric intake. So again, I'll say this. Just because you're fasting doesn't mean you're going to lose weight. Okay. If you're still eating the same bullshit in the times that you eat, you're still going to gain weight. You cannot defeat the laws of thermodynamics. There's no magical thing that happens when you fast that helps you lose weight so you can still eat the same amount of calories. There's a lot of things that go into it. So you just have to be mindful of making sure that you're still eating what you want to be eating during your windows of eating. And then, your practiced fasting windows are for a purpose, right? So they're for the autophagy, resetting blood sugar, improving hormonal health, improving your brain health, stuff like that. So here's the common mistakes I see with fasting. And I've touched on it a little bit. The first one is using fasting as an excuse for poor diet choices. So some people they'll fast, like they say, like, oh, I love intermittent fasting, but then they'll eat the ultra processed, high sugar foods. They'll drink booze. They'll just completely negate all the benefits of fasting, right? So just because you fast doesn't mean you're going to get the benefits. The quality nutrition is key. And again, it's like making sure that you're eating quality proteins, real foods, low processed diets. You're getting a good amount of fiber from, plants and fruits, stuff like that. So, which brings me to my next point, and the thing that I see the most, especially with women, is they don't eat enough protein. If you're already not eating enough protein, fasting is not a good idea. Okay, like getting enough protein is a higher priority in my hierarchy pyramid than fasting. Fasting is a nice thing to do, but only if you're getting enough protein in your eating window. So if you're not getting enough protein in the windows that you eat, you're going to lose muscle, okay, as well as body fat, as well as whatever weight you're losing is not necessarily going to be all body fat stores. Okay, if you want to lose fat, you have to make sure you're eating enough protein. For most people, this ends up being anywhere between a gram of protein per pound of ideal body weight, right? 2.2 grams of protein per kilo of muscle mass, etc. So it usually lands anywhere in that kind of window. It's like you're eating about a gram of protein per ideal pound of body weight. If you're not getting that in, and we're talking, mostly animal types of proteins, ideally dense proteins with, a full amino acid profile. And I say that because I do see a lot of challenges with vegan and vegetarians getting enough protein. It's not an ideal diet style. I've done a lot of blood work with vegan and vegetarians, and it is possible to do well and do properly, but it is very difficult. So the ideal protein sources, you're getting them from eggs, fish, beef, venison, turkey, dense animal proteins. Yes, you can get a little bit of protein from things like legumes and beans and nuts and seeds, but it's not quite the hormone response you're looking for or the amino acid profile. You're going to have to eat a lot of food if you're a vegan vegetarian to get enough protein. But that's not really the focus of this podcast. The whole point is that you must be getting enough protein in your eating window if you want to practice fasting. So it just makes it harder to hit those daily protein goals if you shorten your eating window. And if you already have a challenge with that, might not be a good idea. So prioritize protein in your feeding windows. Consider like some supplementation if necessary, whey proteins, etc. Okay. Here's one that I made during my days of competitive CrossFit is fasting and high intensity interval lifting. So fasted cardio has benefits, as I mentioned, like with that fatty acid oxidation. We're talking low level zone 2 cardio. But if you're lifting weights, so you're hitting more the like power, explosiveness, plyometric, and you're doing raging your heart rate up to 95% of your your heart rate max, right? So probably not a good idea to be doing that fasted, only because what happens is your body then relies on a lot of your glycogen storage rather than your fatty acids in your body fat, which can lead to decreased performance. It can lead to muscle breakdown. It can lead to a lot of stress hormone production as well. I believe this was part of the reason I started to break down at the age of 36. Is I was doing some fasting with some workouts of the day, along with some other shitty practices, right? Routine alcohol consumption, not prioritizing sleep, doing some high intensity interval fasting as well as lifting, stuff like that. So here's what I found is a better practice is make sure you get a little bit of carbs protein pre-workout if you're going to just lift or do any sort of high intensity interval. But the cardio stuff, it's great to do that fasted, especially if it's like low level stuff. Now, if you're going to go run a marathon, probably not a good idea to do that fasted. That's a whole other episode. I'll get into that, into some endurance stuff on another episode. But that's a big one is training without adequate fuel when you're doing high intensity interval, or, power explosive sort of like muscular efforts. Let's see. Overuse of fasting for weight loss. This is something I see in my practice. It can cause an overcompensation effect, leading to like excessive intake later. Sustainable weight loss comes from like a total caloric balance, not just like, the fasting period. So in other words, like if you're just starving yourself and then you just binge eat and then starve yourself and then binge eat, that's not going to lead to a sustainable nor a desirable result. Okay, let's talk about health benefits of proper fasting. So we talked a little bit in the beginning about the autophagy that's turned on, so the cellular and hormonal optimization. So here's something cool that happens is that during times of fasting, you actually get a growth hormone spike. So you get increases in your growth hormone, also the IGF-1, which that helps recovery, right? Fat loss, muscle preservation, and things like that. There's plenty of research showing that. It has to do with some of your ghrelin and leptin mechanisms, which are your hunger mechanisms in your body. Also, you can have some ketone production that way, which enhances that mental clarity. A lot of people that have practiced like really low carb diets, ketogenic diets, they'll tell you that one of the biggest benefits that they experience was that mental clarity and focus. Ketones are known for that. I don't necessarily think that you'll dip into like ketone production necessarily if you fast, but certainly you'll get some of that growth hormone surge and IGF-1 production, which helps with recovery and muscle building, fat loss. It can actually help reduce inflammation. So for a lot of you 40-plus-year-olds, especially, this is something that's good to focus on. Reducing like unnecessary inflammation in your body. So like markers of systemic inflammation like CRP, homocysteine, uric acid, things like that. Those it can potentially reduce your risk of chronic disease because of that. So it helps reduce inflammation, by helping turn on the autophagy mechanisms, inhibiting mTOR, stuff like that. Improving gut and digestive function as well. Digestive rest supports gut microbiome. The diversity reduces bloating. They found this in some nice research. So Canny et al. in 2012. I can post that in the notes. And again, I talked a little bit already about fasting cardio. So like the low intensity steady state cardio improves that fat oxidation. In other words, it helps mobilize fat from your body fat storage. It can enhance your endurance too. Again, that's that article from Schoenfeld in 2011. Now, again, resistance training and high intensity workouts, they require proper fueling. So watch out for that. Now, the health risks of improper fasting. I touched on this momentarily, that it actually can screw up your hormones. And this is something that happened to me. I suppressed my immune system and I ended up with recurring staph infections in my elbow, in my knees, and it kept popping up over and over because I was excessively running myself down. Part of the reason was I was doing these long windows of fasting and I was training during some of those windows. So it was elevating my cortisol unnecessarily. Can lead to that prolonged stress response that negatively impacts, not only your immune health, which is again the system in your body that helps you recover from muscular efforts and injuries. It screws up your sleep and your recovery. Hormonal imbalances, especially in women. So we'll talk about this on another episode as far as ketogenic diets and what I've seen with blood work when it comes to ketogenic diets. Fasting and keto, for some reason, like that kind of runs in the same family to a degree that it ends up being sometimes a deficient practice. So in other words, if you're chronically fasting, long-term fasting can disrupt like menstrual cycles. Again, it's due to the changes in those hunger mechanisms. I mentioned leptin and ghrelin. Also, if you're chronically at a deficit as well, your body will start to change its signaling mechanisms, screwing up menstrual cycles, restricting energy, leading to metabolic slowdowns, etc. So, fasting as a means for trying to lean out and lose weight, there are proper ways to do it, but chronically under eating because you're fasting is not a good idea, especially if you're a young woman. You got to be fueling, particularly with enough protein. So protein is muscle sparing. It also helps balance your hormones. And of course, lifting, women in lifting, like it's a no-brainer at this point. There's just far too much research out there that shows that everybody needs to be doing some sort of like resistance training, stress on your muscles. When you're under eating and strength training, this is a bad combo. So that's, again, it's going to spike your cortisol and your stress hormones even more. It's going to lead to decreased strength and recovery. You're not going to be able to retain any lean mass. So protein and carbs are critical, especially in that post-workout window. You don't want to fast too long after intense training because it can impair muscle protein synthesis. Now that like anabolic window is, I guess, mostly a myth from what I understand. Like you don't have to have a protein shake within 20 minutes of your workout. It doesn't work like that necessarily. But listen, if you're working out and then you don't eat for 5 hours, like that's a problem. Your body needs to refuel, needs to replenish its glycogen stores. It needs the proper amino acids for muscle recovery, for you to repair the muscle tissue to be able to recover for your next efforts. Of course, if you're fasting after you work out, it's not a good idea. Risk of disordered eating, of course, it's not my expertise, but can be a slippery slope from what I understand. And I think it aligns with sort of those like fasting and then binge eating and fasting and binge eating. Not a healthy cycle for anybody, but especially anyone who's got a tendency to have disordered eating to any degree, like starvation, anorexia, bulimia, things like that. So fasting is a slippery slope when it comes to those types of things. So in closing, my thoughts and takeaways from this is like, I'm not overly, positive or overly negative on fasting. I think it's to be used as a tool, right? Not a magic bullet. I can't emphasize that enough. It's a tool, not a magic bullet. Okay. Fasting is not going to make you lose weight. Fasting is not the magic bullet that is going to all of a sudden turn you into a Greek god with your shirt off, or, give you this booty that you've been dreaming about. Like, it has to be used strategically. Okay. Focus on protocols that make sense with your lifestyle. Okay. And your training. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a daily practice. You can use this as a daily practice. You can use this as once a week you do a long fast. Those are beneficial. But anything longer than 24 hours, I'm not a big fan of. There are some people that do prolonged fasts and love doing it. They'll do it as what they call a reset. I don't happen to think it's necessary. You don't have to starve yourself for a week. You don't have to do a water fast. You don't have to take fancy supplements to do all this detox and cleansing. Like, your body is always practicing detoxification and autophagy and all these things. Having a window where you don't eat in a 24-hour cycle is a good idea. Like, don't wake up in the middle of the night and eat. Nobody needs to wake up in the middle of the night and eat. Have a routine practice fasting window, but don't get excessive over it. And if you want to practice once a week, you do a 24, cool. If you want to practice like a 14-hour window like I do, cool. I think everyone should practice what you find is most sustainable and aligns with some of those things I'm talking about, right? Making sure that you're not fasting after you work out, making sure you're fasting in a window that still allows you to hit your protein targets during your eating windows. Just experiment with wisely, listen to your body, and always prioritize long-term sustainability. Okay. Anything you're doing that you can't see yourself doing forever, then what are you doing? Okay. This is why I don't love those restrictive challenges. Like, they're cool, and I think it motivates people and you can get result with it. But what I have a hard time seeing is a lot of people that carry helpful and sustainable behaviors after like a really restrictive challenge. So if fasting to any degree is like really restrictive to you, it's probably not a good idea to start, doing a really long fasting challenge. Okay. So pick whatever works for you. If you train hard, fuel appropriately, get enough protein, be mindful of balance, and make sure whatever you're doing it smart. So I appreciate you guys. Thanks for listening. Again, subscribe, share, leave a review. I really appreciate all the valuable feedback I've gotten from folks. I've had some people, tell me that they loved the episodes. I haven't got too many negative feedback, but I'm not opposed to getting any if you guys have anything else to share. So I love it all. Anyways, have an awesome week, you guys. We'll check in next week and let's fucking go.